Welcome to Cryptic Chronicles, the place where the eerie, the unexplained, and the downright spooky come to life. I'm thrilled to have you here, whether you're a longtime fan of chilling tales or a newcomer looking for a thrill. Here, we dive into the most bizarre and unsettling stories, from creepy encounters to paranormal experiences and everything in between. We want to hear from you. If you have a story that's as creepy as it is captivating, feel free to submit it to the email address in the description. If your story gets selected to be featured, you'll win a surprise gift as a thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share these tales with friends who are ready for a scare. Thank you for joining Cryptic Chronicles, where every story tells its own haunting truth.
Story 1. The Unseen Tenant. When we moved into our new apartment, we felt relief wash over us. After months of uncertainty and searching, we had finally secured a place, no longer at the mercy of the brutal rental market. It wasn't much, just the upper floor of an old Victorian house that had been converted into duplexes decades ago. The building had character, to put it mildly. The narrow stairwells, the antique doors, the outdated plumbing, all spoke of a different time. And then there was the way the house carried sound. It had a peculiar stillness at night, like a place long accustomed to silence, but unwilling to rest peacefully. It was just me at first. My wife, 7 months pregnant, stayed behind as I secured the apartment and found work. The timing was eerie in its perfection. I got the call confirming our rental on the same day. We learned my wife's induction date. I managed to return home in time for our son's birth. Beautiful baby boy with bright blue eyes and hair that would later turn a soft strawberry blonde. He was perfect. We were exhausted but happy. After the hospital stay, I took the most expensive Uber ride of my life. Hours. Across Ontario to make it back to work and meet the realtor for our new keys. That night I slept alone in the apartment, a cheap mattress on the floor, my only comfort in the empty space. The silence stretched unnaturally, as if the walls were listening. Then the footsteps began. At first I heard what sounded like slow, deliberate steps on the stairs leading to the main door. A hard-soled shoe, measured and patient. I held my breath, listening, the rhythm stopping just outside. When I gathered the courage to check, the stairwell was empty, bathed in moonlight through the narrow windows. I told myself it was just an old house settling. But 20 minutes later, the sounds returned. This time, they weren't outside. They were inside. Soft, deliberate footsteps crept across the living room floor, just beyond my mattress. My back was to the door, my body frozen. The weight of something, shifted the old floorboards beside me. I could feel it. The presence stood there watching. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. For what felt like an eternity, I lay still, my heart hammering. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the feeling vanished. When I finally forced myself to turn my head, the room was empty. The morning light felt like salvation. Weeks passed. My wife and son joined me and life returned to normal. Our first Halloween, our first Christmas as a family. The house still creaked at night, but I ignored it. I convinced myself that I had imagined it all. Then, a year later, my wife became pregnant again. By sheer luck, the downstairs tenants moved out, and we eagerly took over the entire house. It felt like a new beginning, more space, more freedom. I set up a workshop in the basement, excited to have a space for myself. That's when the footsteps returned. I was alone downstairs, organizing my tools, when I heard them. A slow, unmistakable rhythm. Shoes clicking against the hardwood floor above me. the exact same deliberate pace I had heard that first night. This time I didn't freeze. I ran up the stairs, determined to catch whoever or whatever was there. Every room was empty. I told my wife. She shrugged it off. She had heard the old house groan before, but I never told her about the thing that had stood beside my bed. Then came the night. The baby monitor spoke. We were lying in bed, scrolling through our phones, our son's nursery softly playing over the monitor beside us. The usual tiny breaths, the occasional sleepy coo, then static. A deep, crackling hiss erupted from the speaker, followed by something else, a voice, a low, gruff murmur, a man's voice, speaking to our son. I bolted upright. My wife's eyes were wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her face pale. "Yes. What is that?" We sprinted up the stairs. My heart pounded as I flung open the nursery door. Our son sat in his crib, giggling and babbling, blowing spit bubbles at nothing. The room was empty, but the air was thick, charged, as if something unseen had only just slipped away. I told my wife everything, the footsteps, the presence. That night, alone in the living room, she didn't say a word, just held our son tighter. That night, I moved back upstairs. I couldn't bear to be separated from him. Not now. And every night, as I lay awake on the floor beside his crib, I listened. For the footsteps, for the voice, for whatever else shared this house with us. And I waited. Story 2, The Trail That Led Nowhere. Harper always loved running the trails. The winding dirt paths carved through the fields and dense woods were his escape, a way to push himself past exhaustion and find a rhythm in the quiet isolation of nature. But one summer afternoon, that solitude betrayed him. The town had seen better days. The economy was crumbling. Businesses boarded up, and the streets had become a stage for desperation. Strangers drifted in from the cities, lured by cheap rent and empty homes. Not all of them were bad people. Some were just struggling. Others were the kind of people you didn't want to meet alone, especially not on the trails. It was a hot, humid day when Harper set out. The afternoon sun baked the fields, and the occasional whisper of wind through the leaves was the only relief from the thick air. He had run this path 100 times before. He knew every bend, every stretch where the trees broke into open meadows, every hidden branch of the trail that snaked down into the valley. But today felt different. He first saw them as distant shapes against the horizon, 2 figures moving slowly along the path ahead. As he drew closer, details came into focus. One man sat lazily on a chopper-style bicycle, tattooed from neck to wrist, his presence radiating something off. The other walked behind, swinging what Harper thought was a thick branch at the tall grass lining the path. Then he saw the blade glint in the sunlight. It wasn't a branch. It was a machete. Harper's heartbeat drummed in his ears, but he forced himself to keep his stride even. He pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through his music, hoping to make himself look disinterested, non-threatening, just another runner passing by. As he neared the men, the biker gave him a slow, crooked smile, nodding in mock acknowledgement. Harper kept his eyes down, but out of the corner of his vision, he saw the man with the machete stop swinging. He wasn't clearing grass. He wasn't doing anything at all. Just standing there, blade in hand, staring. Harper didn't stop. He didn't even break his pace. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope over an unseen abyss, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he held steady, moving past them, his breath shallow. Then, just as he thought he was safe, He heard it. What about him? The biker's voice was lazy, like he was asking about the weather, but the way he said it sent ice through Harper's veins. A pause, then a response muffled by distance, but filled with something Harper didn't want to understand. He didn't wait to hear the rest. He bolted. Gravel crunched under his feet as he pushed himself into a full sprint. Behind him, the voices rose, but he didn't dare look back. The trails were open here, too exposed. If they had bikes, they'd catch him. He needed cover. Up ahead, he spotted his chance, a narrow offshoot of the main trail, half hidden by thick branches. Without hesitation, he lunged into the foliage, diving into the undergrowth. Thorned vines clawed at his skin as he barreled downhill, his feet barely finding purchase on the steep descent. The valley swallowed him whole. Panting, Harper pressed himself against the trunk of an ancient tree, crouching low, listening. Above him, the men were shouting. Where'd he go? Check down there. Heavy footsteps crunched through the brush. They were looking for him. Harper didn't move. The forest was dense, a tangled maze of gnarled roots and thick whispering leaves. He knew these trails better than anyone, knew that if he followed the valley's curve, he could reach the river, and from there, he could disappear. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched thin. Then, forget it. He's gone. Their voices faded. Harper stayed hidden, motionless, heart hammering against his ribs. He waited until the crickets resumed their song. Until the forest felt like itself again. Only then did he move, slipping through the shadows, following the river's path. By the time he emerged on the outskirts of town, the sun had long since vanished. He was drenched in sweat, caked in mud, his breath ragged. I ran into him that night. Just as he stumbled up the path from the conservation area, he looked hollow, like he had seen something he couldn't explain. It took a while for him to tell me what had happened. And even now, years later, I wonder, if he hadn't run, if he had hesitated even for a second, what would have happened on that lonely trail? Maybe some paths aren't meant to be walked alone. Maybe some trails lead nowhere at all.